guys, it's Terry coming from my bedroom again. I'm in a different place. This is my Chinese tapestry. Here's Jerry still sitting with me. And I have a couple of teddy bears also that come and sit with me. I was gonna read some chapter books to you guys from my favorite fairy tale called The Tales of the Enchanted Forest, or the Enchanted Forest Chronicles. And the first book is Dealing with Dragons by Patricia Reedy. And it's about a princess who's bored at being a princess. Here's chapter 1, in which Cimarine refuses to be proper and has a conversation with a frog. Lindenwald was a large kingdom just east of the Mountains of the Morning, where the philosophers were highly respected and the number 5 was fashionable. The climate was unremarkable. The knights kept their armor brightly polished mainly for show. It had been centuries since the dragons had come east. There was a usual periodic problem with royal children and uninvited fairy godmothers, but they were always the sort of thing that could be cleared up by finding the proper prince or princess to marry the unfortunate child a few years later. All in all, Lindenwald was a very prosperous and pleasant place. Cimarine hated it. Cimarine was the youngest daughter of the king of Lindenwald, and her parents found her rather trying. Their first 6 daughters were perfectly normal princesses with long golden hair and sweet dispositions, each one more beautiful than the rest. Cimarine was lovely enough, but her hair was jet black, and she wore it in braids instead of curled and pinned like her sisters. And she wouldn't stop growing. Her parents were quite sure that no prince would want to marry a girl who could look him in the eye instead of gazing up at him becomingly with her lashes. As for the girl's disposition, well, people were being polite. When people were being polite, they said she was strong minded. When they were angry or annoyed with her, they said she was as stubborn as a pig. The king and queen did the best they could. They hired the most superior tutors and governesses to teach Cimarine all the things a princess ought to know: dancing, embroidery, drawing, etiquette. There was a great deal of etiquette, from the proper way to curtsy before a visiting prince, or to how loudly was permissible to scream when carried off by a giant. Lindenwold still had an occasional problem with giants. Cimarine found it all very dull, but she pressed her lips together and learned it anyways. And when she couldn't stand it any longer, she would go down to the castle armory and bully the arms master into giving her fencing lessons. As she got older, she found her regular lessons more and more boring. Consequently, the fencing lessons became more and more frequent. And when she was 12, her father found out. Fencing is not proper behavior for a princess, he told her, in a gentle but firm tone recommended by the court philosopher. Cimarine tilted her head to one side. Why not? It's, well, simply not done. Cimarine considered. Aren't I a princess? Yes, of course you are, my dear, said her father with relief. He had been bracing himself for a storm of tears, which was the way his other daughters reacted to reprimands. Well, I fence, Cimarine said with an air of one delivering an unshakable argument. So it is too done by a princess. That doesn't make it proper, dear, put her mother gently. Why not? It just simply doesn't, the queen said firmly. That was the end of Cimarine's fencing lessons. When she was 14, her father discovered she was making the court magician teach her the magic. How long has this been going on? He asked wearily when he arrived in response to the summons. Since you stopped my fencing lessons, Cimarine said. I suppose you're going to tell me it isn't proper behavior for a princess. Well, yes, it isn't proper. Nothing interesting seems to be proper, Cimarine said. You might find some things more interesting if you applied yourself a little more, dear, Cimarine's mother said. I doubt it, Cimarine muttered, but she knew better than to argue when her mother used that tone of voice. That was the end of her magic lessons. The same thing happened over Latin lessons from the court philosopher, the cooking lessons from the castle chef, the economics lessons from the court treasurer, and the juggling lessons from the court minstrel. Cimarine began to grow rather tired of the whole business. When she was 16, Cimarine summoned her fairy godmother. Cimarine, my dear, this sort of thing really isn't done, the fairy said, fanning her away her scented blue smoke that accompanied her appearance. People keep telling me that, Cimarine said. You should pay attention to them then, said the godmother. I am not used to being hauled away from my tea without warning, and you aren't supposed to call me unless it's a matter of utmost importance in your life and future happiness. It is of utmost importance to my life and future happiness, Cimarine said. Oh, very well. You're just a bit young to have fallen in love already. Still, you always have been a precocious child. Tell me about him. Cimarine sighed. It isn't a him. Enchanted is he, the fairy said with a spark of interest. A frog, perhaps. That used to be quite popular, but it seems to have gone out of fashion lately. Nowadays, all the princes are talking birds or dogs or hedgehogs. No, no, I'm not in love with anyone. Then what exactly is your problem? The fairy said with exasperation. This, Cimarine gestured around the castle around her. Embroidery lessons and dancing and being a princess. My dear Cimarine, it's your heritage. It's boring. Boring, the fairy did not appear to believe what she was hearing. Boring. I want to do things, not sit around all day and listen to the court minstrel make up songs about how brave daddy is and how lovely his wife and daughters are. Nonsense, my dear. This is just the stage you're going through. You'll outgrow it soon, and you'll be very glad you didn't do anything rash. Cimarine looked at her godmother suspiciously. You've been talking to my parents, haven't you? Well, they do try to keep me up to date on what my godchildren are doing. I thought so, said Cimarine, and bade her fairy godmother a polite goodbye. A few weeks later, Cimarine's parents took her to a tourney in Satham by the Mountains, the next kingdom over. Cimarine was quite sure that they were taking her because her fairy godmother had told them that something better be done about her, and soon. She kept this opinion to herself. Anything was better than the endless rounds of dancing and embroidery lessons at home. Cimarine realized her mistake almost as soon as they reached the destination, for the king of Sandham by the Mountains had a son. He was a golden-haired, blue-eyed, exceedingly handsome prince, whose duties appeared to consist entirely of dancing attention on Cimarine. Isn't he handsome? Cimarine's lady in waiting sighed. Yes, Cimarine said without enthusiasm. Unfortunately, he isn't anything else. Whatever do you mean? The lady in waiting said. He has no sense of humor. He isn't intelligent. He can't talk about anything except tourneys, and half of what he says he gets wrong. I'm glad we're only staying 3 weeks. I don't think I could stand to be polite to him for much longer than that. But what about your engagement? The lady in waiting horrified. What engagement? Cimarine said sharply. The lady in waiting tried to mutter something about a mistake, but Cimarine put her chin in the best princess fashion and insisted on an explanation. Finally, the lady in waiting broke down. I overheard the Majesties discussing it yesterday. She sniffed into her handkerchief. The stipulations and covenants and contracts and settlements have all been drawn up, and they're going to sign them the day after tomorrow and announce it on the Thursday. I see, said Cimarine. Thank you for telling me. You may go. The lady in waiting left, and Cimarine went to see her parents. They were annoyed and a little embarrassed to find that Cimarine had discovered their plans. But they were still very firm about it. We were going to tell you tomorrow when we signed the papers, her father said. We knew you'd be pleased, dear, her mother said. He's such a good-looking boy. But I don't want to marry Prince Theradrill, Cimarine said. Well, not exactly a brilliant match, Cimarine's father frowning, but I think you'd care how big his kingdom is. It's the prince I don't care for, Cimarine said. Oh, that's a great pity, dear, but it can't be helped, Cimarine's mother said placidly. I'm afraid it isn't likely that you get another offer. Then I won't get married at all. Both her parents looked slightly shocked. My dear Cimarine, said her father, that's out of the question. You're a princess. It simply isn't done. I'm too young to get married. Your great Aunt Rose was married at 16, her mother pointed out. One really can't count all those years she spent asleep under that dreadful fairy's curse. I will not marry the Prince of Sandham by the Mountains, Cimarine said. It isn't proper. What, said her parents together? He hasn't rescued me from a giant or an ogre or freed me from a magic spell, Cimarine said. Both her parents looked uncomfortable. Well, no, said Simri's father. It's a bit late to start arranging it, but we might be able to manage something. I don't think it's necessary, Simarine's mother said. She looked reprovingly at Cimarine. You never paid attention to what was suitable before, dear, so you can start now. Proper or not, you will marry Prince Thorndil 3 days from Thursday. But, mother, I'll send the wardrobe mistress to your room and start fitting your bride's clothes, Cimmerine's mother said firmly, and that was the end of the conversation. Cimmerine decided to try a more direct approach. She went to Prince Thorndil. He was in the castle armory looking at swords. Good morning, princess, he said as he finally noticed Cimmerine. Don't you think this is a lovely sword? Cimmerine picked it up. The balance is off. I believe you're right, said Thorndil after a moment's study. Pity now. I'll have to find another. Is there something I can do for you? Yes, said Cimmerine. You cannot marry me. What? Thorndil looked confused. You don't really want to marry me, do you? Said Cimmerine. Well, not exactly. I mean, in that way. That is, oh, good, Cimmerine said correctly, interpreting his mother's reply as no, not at all. Then you'll tell your father you don't want to marry me. I couldn't do that, Thorndil said. I wouldn't be right. Well, why not? Cimmerine demanded crossly. Well, because princesses just don't do that. Then how are you going to keep from marrying me? I guess I won't be able to, Thorndil said, thinking hard for a moment. How do you like that sword over there? The one with the silver hilt? Cimmerine left in disgust and went out the castle garden. She was very discouraged. She looked as she was going to marry the Princess Santa by the mountains whether she wanted to or not. I'd rather be eaten by a dragon, she muttered. That can be arranged, a voice from beside her left slipper. Cimmerine looked down and saw a small green frog looking up at her. I beg your pardon, did you speak? She asked. You don't see anyone else around, do you? Said the frog. Oh! Cimmerine had never met a talking frog before. Are you an enchanted prince? She asked a little doubtfully. No, but I've met a couple of them, and after a while you pick a few things up, said the frog. Now why is it that you want to be eaten by a dragon? My parents want me to marry Prince Thorndil, said Cimmerine, and you don't want to? Sensible of you, said the frog. I don't like Thorndil. He used to skip rocks across the top of my ponds. They always sank into my living room. I'm sorry, Cimmerine said politely. Well, said the frog, what are you going to do about it? Marry Thorndil? I don't know. I tried talking to my parents, but they won't listen, and neither will Thorndil. I didn't ask what you said about it, said the frog. I'd ask what you're going to do. 9 times out of 10, talking is a good way of avoiding doing things. What kind of things would you suggest? Cimmerine said, stung. You could challenge the prince to a duel, the frog suggested. He'd win, Cimmerine said. It's been 4 years since I've been allowed to do any fencing. You could turn him into a toad. I never got past invisibility in my magic lessons. Transformations are an advanced study, said Cimmerine. The frog looked at her disapprovingly. Can't you do anything? I can curtsy, Cimmerine said disgustingly. I know 17 different country dances, 9 ways to agree with an ambassador from Cathay without actually promising him anything, and 143 embroidery stitches. And I can make Cherry's Jubilee. Cherry's Jubilee? Asked the frog, snapped passing fly. The castle chef taught me before father made him stop, Cimmerine explained. The frog munched briefly and then swallowed and said, I suppose there's no help for it. You'll have to run away. Run away, Cimmerine said. I don't like that idea. Too many things could go wrong. If you don't like the idea of marrying Prince Thorndil either, the frog pointed out, maybe I can think of some other way of getting out of getting married. The frog snorted. Such as? Cimmerine didn't answer. After a moment, the frog said, I thought so. Do you want my advice or not? Yes, please, said Cimmerine. After all, she didn't have to follow it. Go to the main road outside the city and follow it away from the mountains, said the frog. After a while, you will come to a small pavilion made of gold, surrounded by trees made of silver with emerald leaves. Go straight past it without stopping, and don't answer if anyone calls out to you from the pavilion. Keep on till you reach a hovel, and walk straight up to the door and knock 3 times and snap your fingers and go inside. You will find some people there who can help you out of your difficulties if you're polite about asking and if they're in the right mood. And that is all. The frog turned abruptly and dove into the pool. Thank you very much, Cimarine called after it, thinking that the frog's advice sounded odd indeed. She rose and went back to the castle. She spent the rest of the day being fitted and fussed over by ladies in waiting until she was ready to scream. By the end of the formal banquet, at which she had to sit across Prince Starendale and listen to endless stories about his progress in battle, Cimarine was more than ready to take the frog's advice. Late at night, when most of the castle was asleep, Cimarine bundled up 5 clean handkerchiefs and her best crown. And then she dug out the notes she had taken during her magic lessons and carefully cast a spell of invisibility. It seemed to work, but she was still very watchful as she sneaked out of the castle. After all, it had been a long time since she practiced. By morning, Cimarine was well outside the city and visible again, walking down the main road that led away from the mountains. It was hot and dusty, and she began to wish that she had bought a bottle of water instead of the handkerchiefs. Just before noon, she spied a small grove of trees next to the road ahead, and it looked like a cool, pleasant place to rest for a few minutes. She hurried forward. As she reached the grove, however, she saw the trees were made of the finest silver, and their shining green leaves were huge emeralds. In the center of the grove stood a charming pavilion made of gold and hung with gold curtains. Cimarine slowed down and looked longingly at the cool green shade beneath the trees. Just then a woman's voice called out from the pavilion, "My dear, you look so tired and thirsty. Come and sit with me and share my luncheon." The voice was so kind and coaxing that Cimarine took 2 steps towards the edge of the road before she remembered the frog's advice. "Oh no," she thought to herself, "I'm not going to be caught this easily." She turned without saying anything and hurried on down the road. A little farther on, she came to a tiny, wretched-looking hovel made of cracked, weathered gray boards. The door hung slantwise on a broken hinge, and the whole building looked as if it was going to topple over any moment. Cimarine stopped and stared doubtfully at it, but she had followed the frog's advice this far. She thought it would be silly to stop now. So she shook the dust from her skirts, put on her crown so to make a good impression, and marched up to the door and knocked 3 times and snapped her fingers just like the frog told her. Then she pushed the door open and went in. All right, that was the first chapter. We can wait till the next chapter tomorrow because my voice is a little dry. And the name of the next chapter is In Which Cimarine Discovers the Value of a Classical Education and Has Some Unwelcome Visitors. It should be really interesting. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I will come back tomorrow with a new one. Bye.